Button. The button is hit and Zoom is being recorded, and that's fine. And there we go. We're live.
Thank you so much. Hey, Dr. Thompson, we're just waiting for everybody to kind of roll in, log in, and get their audio going, and we'll get this meeting going.
Got it.
And Dr. Thompson, if you're okay, I'm going to give it just another little bit. I know the Lieutenant Governor's coming and she'll be speaking after you, but it's crazy time of year right now. So if you don't mind, if you think it's okay to wait just a little bit.
I'll wait as long as you want me to wait. It's that simple.
All right. Well, it won't be long. It won't be long, but I just want to give her an opportunity to hop in. Well, for the sake of time, I will go on and get started, or let you, Dr. Thompson, kick us off because you have some information to share, but I'm so glad to see your faces. I know some people will be popping in right on time or a little bit late. There's a lot going on right now, as you all know, and so I don't want to take up any of your precious time, and I really am appreciative of everybody being online. So, Dr. Thompson, I'm going to let you kick this off and get us going for today. We have a lot on our agenda.
We sure do, Amanda. Thank you. Thank everybody for showing up to our first meeting of the Commonwealth Education Continuum for 2023. I have to say it's good to see your faces. I've seen some of you already, but the rest I haven't. Good to see you. If it's the first time, good to see you again. If it's been more than the first time. So, you know, there's a whole lot that we can discuss that has happened over the last 2 years. It's been many. And I've gotten the opportunity to speak around the country about many of the things that we're doing. And you probably, we'll show you this in a little bit, but you probably saw that we were picked out of 1 or 3 states that has a significant P20 effort, you know, and that makes me proud, obviously. They believe what we're doing is the right thing to do in any state, but they believe that Kentucky, 1 of 3, I think Minnesota was the other, and I forgot what the other. I don't think about anybody but us. But bottom line, you know, it's great that we've accomplished what we have accomplished over the last 2 years. You've heard me over and over again talk about the value of higher education. I talk about the value of education too. I really talk about the value proposition from, you know, early childhood all the way through post-secondary to the workforce. You know that all the research shows that even in Kentucky, 90% of the jobs will require a post-secondary credential of some sort in order to thrive in this economy. So I'm proud of that conversation. Last week, I got a chance to meet with my board and others, and I shared our fall enrollment. You know, there's a couple of things that we surely have to bring up to talk about that is directly a part of what we need to be discussing as a group here. So you know, without further ado, I want to share slides through to 11 if I could. Can we pull those up? You know, it's hard for me to read these in this way, but I'm old, right? But how many of you can see what's on the screen?
You'll have more slides. This is just the intro.
Okay, good. Well, if you can see what's on the screen, we got our preliminary enrollment data, you know, a week or so ago, and an opportunity to talk about it. I want to talk first of all, though, about the direct impact on our economy, and that's the degrees and credentials that we have put in place. And we've gone through a process, Paul Zarapata is on here, to know that we look at quality here. So it's not just quantity, but proud to say Kentucky, one of the few states the year in COVID has come out with a positive from last year, which was a 0.6. I'm really proud to say that over the last 5 years, we put 16.6% on, in Kentucky. We need to keep more of our citizens with these degrees. We need not to let them run away from us, but we're proud that Kentucky is leading, one of the states that's leading that effort. As a matter of fact, we're number 2. Let's share the second slide. As I said, we're tied with Utah for being number 2 in this arena. Only Rhode Island is beating us, and that's a whole nother story. It's a small state with a few people, and a lot of people move there to do stuff. So if you see the 1-year trend in bachelor's degree, this is probably not what I'm particularly happy with, even though it's a little bit better than other states, no doubt, but still not happy. We've had a 1-year trend that's trending downward by 1%. The 5-year trend is flat. So it's going to take more. So thank you, Paul, for what KCTCS is doing, but it's going to take more baccalaureate degrees in addition to 2-year and short-term certificates to get us where we need to go. Next slide, please. If you look at KCTCS's credentials, much of this is due to 2 things. One is adult learners are out of the system that we have to address somehow. There's no way we can get where we need to go to 60% attainment by 2030 unless we get more adult learners. But we can't do it either with the downward trend of our high school. I mean, we have a lower number graduating, true enough, but we have a really low number going to college, 47.8%. This is really due to us. I mean, we've been able to, in other words, if you look at the data so far, give me the other slide and I'll show you. Well, graduate degrees, let me talk about that first. I'll come back to the other. Graduate degrees are up. And these are important degrees that go straight to our economy. We have an approval and review process that has to show that our degrees that we're approving and reviewing has a direct impact on needs in the state. So I should tell you that. So these are not just degrees people are going back and get for the heck of it. These have direct influence. And we need more graduate degrees, undergraduate degrees together to get where we need to go in undergraduate certificates. But we're up significantly in this area, which has really helped tremendously. Next slide. So degrees awarded to target populations, we haven't been shy about saying that we cannot leave anybody behind in this process. If we leave somebody behind, we don't have a lot to brag about. So I'm proud to say in one area, not so proud in another area, to say that we have, in fact, we're closing gaps with our underrepresented minorities as faster than any other state. That is very much a feather in our cap and to our institutions for working hard to make sure this happens. Even though we're closing gaps somewhat in our low income, we're going to have to increase this tremendously. This is an area where we've got to double down on. This is especially true for our KCTCS population groups, simply because this is our affordable college system in place that allows more people to come in and then hopefully transfer to our 4-year population or get a certificate, technical certificate or degree that goes directly into the populations. So this is an area where we're going to have to really increase. You see our working adult population. This is not a good statistic. So we're working with Representative Tipton and others, governor's office, to talk about how do we quickly start addressing this. So we've seen this trend for a while, but we have to start addressing this, or we're already in trouble to some degree, in my opinion, but we need to address this immediately. Next slide, please. So fall enrollment, this gets to us a little bit, right? You see the publics and IQ 1-year trend, we're up. That's good. We've reversed what's happened during COVID. That's good. And this comes in a variety of places, but our 5-year trend is only 1.2. We were actually down a little bit before this year, a 0.6. So we have reversed a piece of that, but there's some trajectory numbers that aren't good. Now, where did we get a lot of this enrollment from? It wasn't new students necessarily, the students that we were able to actually keep in school all the way to graduation. And I don't have this statistic up here, I don't think, but I'm proud to say we now are back to our 4-year degree being a 4-year degree. It's 4.1 now. So we have, for our baccalaureate degree, and our 2-year degree is just a little over 2 and not over 3 as it was just a few years ago. So all of these things are good, but if we look at just our 4-year publics alone, we're down 2.5%, and KCTCS is down 4.8. So a lot, and IQ is up. And one of the reasons why IQ is up are some of the innovative strategies are used at a couple of the institutions like the Cumberlands and Campbellsville. So and many of those are graduate degrees, but that's where some of those numbers are coming from. Next slide, please. So if you look at our URM, they are really the only population that's up in enrollment across the board, the only population. And that says a lot about us, right? But we can't, I'm glad about that, but we also are down in some of our other areas that are significant that we need to focus on. And you see our difference in sectors where we're at, but overall, low income, we have to double down on that somehow. And we're in process of talking about that with a variety of constituency, including our public elected officials. Next slide, please. So if you look at dual credit, I mean, this is an area where, we've rebounded pretty well. I mean, this is because there's been a lot of focus by us, by our K-12 institutions and by the legislature, governor's office and others to really focus on this. So this is an area that we should be building a pipeline with, more intentional. So I'm not going to call it low-hanging fruit, Amanda. I'm smart enough not to do that anymore. But I am going to say it's an area where we have to grab. And we are in reach of being able to build this truly as a pipeline effort. So we're happy with this number, and you should be too, but with the statistic, but we are going to have to figure out how to translate that into higher enrollments once they get out of high school. Next slide, please. So there's a lot we're going to cover in today's slide. I want to put it on a table so you'll have some understanding. We have to really think a lot about what it means. We can talk learning loss, and there is learning loss. There's also, there was some learning loss before COVID, really learning loss now. How do we combat this, right? And we have done a few things that I'm happy to report on, or Amanda will, that shows some of the things we've done. But we also have a 47.8% college going rate in Kentucky from our K-12 institutions. Only 5% more go out of state. So we almost got 50% of our students that are not getting a credential of any sort. Now you're going to say, well, they've all gone to work, there's great jobs. The statistics doesn't bear that out. More have gone to work, but we also have more that are not going to work and off the unemployment rolls. So somehow this value proposition that we have to build is really more onerous than anything we've ever thought. And we're going to have to take this as a serious concern. If we're not getting more of these high school students transitioning to college, we're going to pay for them on the back end, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's prison, whether it's something, we're going to pay for it. So it makes a lot of sense for us to create this as a solution pattern versus the others. So you saw our agenda today. I do want to say that as we move to a full on, we got a short session. They're saying not going to open the budget, Representative Tipton, except for one item. We'll see, but if they happen to do it, we'll be ready to ask. I'm sure they're ready to say, of course, you can have whatever you want to because y'all have been so successful. I'm assuming that's what they'll say. But, bottom line, we're going to have to get into this thing together, Lieutenant Governor, and figure out what it means. I see the governor's out there talking about teacher shortage, so are we, and a lot of other folks along those lines. My hope is that the Ed Continuum truly still, as we've done the last 2 years, tend to be the catalyst for advocacy, the catalyst for good knowledge, catalyst for good policy. So with that in mind, Lieutenant Governor, I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. And speaking of catalyst, I've got a great thing to talk about today. So I'm really excited about all of our work together. I'm excited about expanding this work and really focusing on the impact of the actual education pipeline. Our state has worked incredibly hard to recover and come back after the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of you know how passionate I am about education, improving the pipeline, closing those gaps that we see at the transition points. And I want to make a point about how it's critically important to start with our littlest learners. When we started this continuum, one of the decisions we were faced with was what groups would we include in these conversations. And I made a push to include early childhood education. We don't have a streamlined universal early education system in Kentucky yet, but I knew it was a priority of the governor's in mind. And so I wanted to go ahead and make sure that that voice was at the table. Those players were at the table and included in these conversations because they are the foundation of the rest of the work that we have to do with the continuum. As many of you have probably seen, the governor and I have been traveling the state talking about our Education First plan. And I will say that one of the absolute key cornerstones to this Education First plan is ensuring that every 4-year-old in Kentucky has access to universal pre-K. That could look different in different places, and that's okay. We want access and opportunity because one of the biggest reasons is there's about 2/3 of our kindergartners that walk through the door on the first day of kindergarten ill prepared. You heard me. 2/3 of our students are walking through. So from the very beginning, they're behind. And so we can't afford to wait until 3rd grade testing or 6th grade or whatever those things are, those markers are. We've got to make sure that we are building in high quality early childhood education and learning experience for every child in Kentucky. It will change the trajectory of our state. It will change our high school graduation and transition readiness rates. It will change the future of higher education in Kentucky, and it will produce the kind of workforce that can sustain the economic growth that we're seeing in Kentucky right now. But we cannot fail to act on this. We have to make sure that we are putting this together, not just for long-term success, but one of the things that we talk about is women disproportionately were pushed out of the workforce during the pandemic for caretaking purposes. In Washington, D.C., they instituted universal pre-K for every 4-year-old. And in the first year, their labor participation rate went up 10%. That tells you right there that this is a barrier to people entering the workforce. We know that Cincinnati is looking at instituting early childhood for 4-year-olds, universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. That's going to put us at a competitive disadvantage in Northern Kentucky. And so we want to make sure that our kids have every opportunity to succeed. And what that means first and foremost is they don't walk through the door behind. Right? We've got to make sure they walk through the door the first day of kindergarten prepared. And so I'm looking forward to expanding our work together, to sharing all these new opportunities later today that will engage in these discussions towards strengthening our education pipeline and all of those things. And I also want to close by saying that this is important to me as a teacher and as Lieutenant Governor because it's the right thing to do. But this is critically important to me as a mother. Next week I will have a 3-year-old. Dr. Thompson, I know I don't look old enough to have a 3-year-old, but but next week I will have a 3-year-old. I'm living this. I'm living this. The anxiety around making sure my child is one of the 1/3 of the kids that walk through the door prepared. And I want that for every kid in Kentucky. And so that's what we're committed to fighting for. And I'm so glad that the Continuum is going to work towards helping us map out a plan and a framework to get there. So I'm going to turn it back over to Robin so she can review our objectives for today. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thompson and Lieutenant Governor Coleman for a warm welcome and inspiring words. As you can see on this screen here, we're going to spend a few minutes today revisiting and refocusing on our purpose and the scope of our Continuum's work. And so thank you for all the comments about how we're already expanding in that area. Today, we'll also welcome Brianna Falduti and Janice Lee, who are here with us from the Education Strategy Group. They're going to be sharing some insights from the evaluation that they conducted of our Summer Bridge program. And I'm excited to have them. Following Brianna's presentation and a brief discussion, we will go into strategy sessions as we typically do to discuss advocacy around our efforts related to 8th to 9th grade transition programming, and also the support for a strong sense of belonging among first-year college students. And these two topics were identified as priorities for the Continuum for this year. So this is where we'll start our work. And then at the end, we'll wrap up our meeting with some challenges and some announcements. So you can see here our objectives for today, kind of summarize what we said there. And if there are no questions, I'll turn things over to Amanda. She's going to lead us through a discussion of the CEC's expanding work.
Thank you, Robin. And if you don't mind to mute, thank you. We are pretty close in our offices and we don't want anybody else to hear the echo. So just always bringing back to what our purpose is. And I really think Dr. Thompson and Lieutenant Governor Coleman really teed us up well for today. And just so happens with the ESG report that came out yesterday, just was the perfect storm to really elevate the work that you're here to do, that you have been doing. The one thing I want to bring to your attention, you can see what our purpose was. We wrote this nearly 2 years ago, and the logo that CPE and KDE had worked on together, I mean, you can see it's the infinity symbol. If it was connected between the person and the Kentucky symbol, as a continuum. And both of our co-leads have led it, and have shared it today in their different perspectives. I know Dr. Glass wish he could have been here. He was out of state today, but he shared some of the same sentiment pieces about that. This is really not one piece, but it's a transition from beginning to end. And what has really been powerful for us to look at is Dr. Thompson, when he shared the data around underrepresented minority students, low-income students, adult learners, when we're really trying to target and increase access to all of our Kentuckians, the impact that we have on our young adults or our adult learners coming back into the education field or to upskill or get credentialed directly impact how that changes the trajectory of their child or the children that they have for early care and preschool. And so each transition point, which I hope to have next time, Robin attempted it and I attempted it, and what we are not are graphic designers. And it's to really show you the points through the continuum of each transition point. And a lot of times where Dr. Thompson's talking about the potholes or the leaky pipes of the education pipeline, a lot of times those occur in the transition pieces because they are huge transitions that we probably take for granted. A lot of that transitioning from a pre-K to K is huge for a child and their family. It starts compulsory school, it gets into academics, self-care, lots of things, all the way through 3rd grade, 5th grade into 6th grade, going to middle school or junior high. Those are huge transition points, not just academically, but socially, and to prepare those students for new environments, new challenges, and to continue to grow, to be prepared. That goes into that 8th to 9th grade on track, which you all know we have been working on 9th grade on track, and really started pulling the research around that. And it's so super strong on why that transition from 8th grade to 9th grade matters, why middle school education matters to prepare students for career opportunities as they enter into high school, to explore, to build up their academic skills, and really to prepare for post-secondary. And the big piece we've been heavily focused on, which is transitional point, from high school into post-secondary is that's completely a choice to that young adult. And they are no longer in compulsory school. They don't have to go to school or to get trained or anything. It's really big decisions that they have to start making as young adults. And that goes all the way into our advanced degrees and as folks enter the workforce. And so we're really looking at expanding each one of those transition points to strengthen those as we work through the pipeline. And so today, as Robin has said, we're really going to be digging deeply in on the 8th to 9th grade transition, that 9th grade on track, and the work that was elevated by you all in December, how we look at that and how that prepares us for moving forward into our actions. And then also that, excuse me, successful transition into post-secondary. That doesn't mean they're just happy once they get there and everything's good. It's really how did they get there, which connects to that successful transition point, and how do they sustain and thrive in that environment. So it's not just getting them to the finish line, pushing them over into that next level and our hands are clean and we don't have to worry about it. But it's really digging into what makes that successful and for them to sustain, because we don't want them to come one year. We want them to complete their credential, their degree, and or their training to prepare them to be productive citizens and be economically mobile in our state and within their families. And so it's just very timely today. Actually, Robin, if you'll share that next slide, that as we have been working on this P20 approach, it is far from easy, but I think it is highly impactful. And I've really been challenged by folks to say, so what do you guys do? What is your purpose? Is it just a bunch of talking heads, or are you just a bunch of leaders just talking about education issues? And I think that's quite the contrary. It's a synergy that we have going around, bringing different perspectives and the voices of folks from all over our state, which was one of our norms, to really bring about thoughtful change and collaboration. And so as President Thompson mentioned yesterday, ESG issued a article or a news brief. I don't know, Brianna, what you would call it, but it's called The Renewed Promise of P20 Councils. And I retweeted it yesterday, and we were highlighted along with Minnesota and North Carolina. Hawaii was mentioned, Illinois was mentioned. There were lots of P20 councils, and every one of us looked very, very, very different. And it really digs into how do you sustain these things? What does it mean? But what was impactful for us, I read through every word of that article to even learn from others, because I'm still muddling through how we make this sustainable and impactful. But if you look at the quote that's on the screen, I'm going to be quiet for a second so you can actually read it. This was at the end of that brief. And what I want to elevate onto this quote is at the end, as state leaders undoubtedly continue to seek strategies to drive improvement in their state's educational and economic realities, enhanced P20 collaboration cannot be overlooked as a primary vehicle for improving educational attainment and economic mobility for all. And if we can do this and have an impact on this, y'all will be doing good stuff. And so we are pushing to be intentional, to be action-oriented, and to use you to help us elevate the message, share the information, the resources, and connect the dots. If we don't, we will not succeed in silos. And I am very grateful for collaborative leadership that is on this call that really is making a difference by bringing people to the table. And that's exactly what we're here to do, is bring folks to the table, talk about what the experiences are, talk about the realities of things we may not hear about from every end of our state, and make thoughtful recommendations for change. And so I'm really grateful for your time. We will not be talking about early post-secondary opportunities today, just because there's a lot of actions going into that, so we can update you in March about that. But one of the things that you all have really recommended and talked a lot about is our Summer Bridge program. And if you remember, we were able to give grants the last 2 years, and we're going to do one more small iteration coming up with the ESSER dollars that KDE generously gave us to do, because we know there's evidence behind this, and we know that this is an impactful practice that we want all of our campuses to do. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brianna and Janice from ESG to share the preliminary evaluation of impact on this. Now, remember, there's only been 2 summer's worth, but we're already learning things and how we can improve our practices and the impact ultimately, which is the most important of the impact it has on students. So Brianna, I'm going to hand it over to you and you should be able to share. If not, we can give that to you.
Man, I want to interrupt just real quickly. Amy Neal had her hand raised and I just wondered if we needed to stop for a second.
I am so sorry, Amy.
Well, I was just going to share it in the chat, and I just was going to thank you, Dr. Ellis, for sharing that and just recognize we all know how powerful language can be, but I wondered if anyone noticed that they said infancy into workforce. And I would just really love if we could consistently talk about our work in that way. It's really easy. And I think, you know, we get into the habit of saying like K-12, but infancy is where it does start. So just thank you so much for sharing that and just flagging that for all of us.
Absolutely. So sorry.
Amy, I did want to say this, that I normally say P through the workforce, but I think infancy is better. I mean, I thought I was capturing it, but as I think about what we do even before they get into a preschool and incorporating all of that, families and, you know, and other things into this, I think is very, very good. I appreciate that reminder.
Great. All right, Brianna, we're turning it to you.
All right, I'm going to get my screen sharing going. Can everyone see my presentation? Can I get a head nod? Yes, awesome, great. So excited to talk to you guys today about the Summer Bridge Program grant that CPE offered over the last 2 years and our review of that. My name is Brianna Falduti. I work for Education Strategy Group, or the organization that wrote that white paper that Amanda referred to, and also have had the pleasure of working alongside Kentucky for the last 2 years now. I think it's been supporting the Continuum and supporting CPE and all the great work that you all do. So today I'm going to talk through the Summer Bridge Grant Program that CPE offered in 2021 and 2022. If you guys think back to this time last year, one of the recommendations that came out of the Continuum and that came out of the successful transition to post-secondary work group was around supporting and continuing grants for Summer Bridge programs that are hosted by institutions. So we wanted to take a look at first understanding just how did programs differ across campuses. Campuses were given a fair amount of autonomy to use the money and the way that they thought worked best for their student population. So we first wanted to understand what programs actually looked like, and then begin to identify best practices for Summer Bridge programs. My colleague Janice Lay is in the room as well. She'll be helping me monitor the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to add them in there, and we'll have some time at the end for additional questions as well as a discussion. So first, just want to give a quick overview of the Summer Bridge Grant Program. So over the last 2 years, CPE funded 50 Summer Bridge programs across 27 institutions. They awarded 21 grants in 2021 and 29 grants in 2022. So saw the program grow in part thanks to this group and the advocacy you all did to continue and grow the program. And almost all of the recipients from 2021 received a grant in 2022 as well. And they were awarded to public, private, 2-year and 4-year institutions across the state. You can see here most were focused in Central Kentucky, but good geographic diversity of the programs that were offered. There were a couple of institutions that had different colleges receive more than one grant. So some of those in Central Kentucky include, like, University of Louisville had 3 different programs, one for math, one for education majors, and one for STEM majors. So what we talked about, or what we did to come to the findings that we're going to share with you. One, we reviewed 21 proposals from the 2021 programs, and as well as their midterm and final reports that they submitted to CPE. We also reviewed the proposals and the midterm reports from the 2022 programs. The final reports are going to be coming out soon, but aren't out quite yet. We also conducted focus groups and interviews with 27 Summer Bridge administrators that represented 21 different institutions. And we also conducted a student focus group with 12 Summer Bridge program participants from 4 different institutions. They represented 2-year, 4-year public and private colleges. So at a high level, our key findings, one, it was around outcomes. For institutions that tracked outcomes and reported back on their outcomes, they found that Summer Bridge program had a positive impact on participants' university experience. So we saw this in the numbers themselves, like matriculation into the fall, retention from fall to spring, academic performance in the fall. But we also saw it in surveys that they conducted of students who were more familiar with campus resources and also described a greater sense of belonging as they began college. Another big finding was that the funds from the grants that CPE provided made it possible for students to meet their educational objectives by decreasing tuition charges. So CPE grants allowed schools to be able to offer the program at free or low cost for students. And also they were able to provide incentives for students to continue the support into the fall. And many said that the CPE grants allowed them to try out ideas that they've been wanting to try for a while and just needed a little bit of money to be able to implement these new ideas. And now they're able to measure how successful those were and be able to iterate on their programs and grow their programs. More than half of the programs dedicated resources specifically for our more disadvantaged students, so students who are typically underserved by higher education, so underrepresented minority students, first generation college students, low income students, those who are academically underprepared, as well as students with accommodations, English language learners. So about half had a specific focus on those student populations. As far as what actually went on during these programs, really varied in what colleges offered, but a lot of common themes that we saw, including accelerated credit, helping students build connections with mentoring was huge across programs, and community building time and time again was what we heard from program administrators as the most important part of Summer Bridge programming. And then, as I just mentioned, mentoring was really big across all of the programs. So almost all provided peer mentoring, all provided some sort of mentoring support, and was often said as one of the most valuable components to student success. I'm going to talk a little bit about what program design elements institutions considered, and then I'll talk through recruitment and some of the program activities that happen during these programs. So first on program design, programs focused on both transitional skills. So this is helping students adjust to college by building self-efficacy, social skills, learning about stress management, and learning about campus resources. And then they also focused on academic preparation. Most institutions kind of combined both of those. And academic preparation looked like supportive and intensive short-term learning environment. So students took classes, they received tutoring, or participated in workshops to build their academic skills. As far as the learning environment, every program offered some type of in-person experience, and about half of the programs are residential, and all of those were at our four-year institutions. There were some programs that did a hybrid approach where some students did it virtually, especially students who were out of state or out of the service area. And there were some that did a mix of students coming on campus for part of the program and participating online for part of the program. Program duration varied from 1 to 8 weeks long. So longer programs tended to be the ones that were offering more academic credits and more classes for students to take over the summer. We heard directly from students that 1 week felt good, and if it was a longer program, they would need to have academic credit to justify taking time away from friends and from work to participate in the program. As I mentioned, as far as cost goes, the majority of the programs were free to students. There were some that charged fees. Most of those also offset those fees for Pell eligible students. And again, notably, most of the programs said that they were able to offer the program for free because of the CPE grant, but they may have to charge fees in the future if they don't have similar investment. Half of the programs focused on recruiting students that are most impacted by structural inequity. So as I mentioned, low-income students, first-gen students, underrepresented minorities, students with accommodations, ELL students. So it was great to see institutions' investment in students who we know historically have a harder time through that summer transition. You think about a first-gen college student who doesn't know all the steps that go into making that transition and enrolling in the fall. So these programs were helping to target students who we know often experience that leaky pipeline that was discussed. For partnerships, institutions did a really wonderful job of partnering across their campus. They relied on admissions, they talked to housing, they talked to dining services, they talked to student activities to offer fun things for their students. So great partnership within the institution, and a number also partnered outside of the institution. So with local employers, with banks to come do personal finance presentations, with local nonprofits to do volunteer activities with students. So that was something that we saw across some institutions, and definitely there was a desire to grow those partnerships outside of the institution. And then sustainability was something that was asked by CPE in the proposal. So how did they plan to scale and continue these programs? And that was something that was a challenge for many institutions. So they saw the money from CPE as a great way to try out new ideas, determine what works, and make a case for scaling, but we're a little unsure of how they were going to continue the program moving forward, especially newer programs that don't have a ton of results to rely on to make a strong case for why their program needs to continue. So next up is recruitment. This was a common challenge across all institutions. So in 2021, I don't think any institution met the goal capacity that they had outlined in their proposal. If you think back to summer of 2021, that meant students for, the first time in 2 school years were getting used to being back in person again. They hadn't had a normal summer in, over a year. There were a lot of different challenges that students were facing. It got better in 2022. So 2022, more institutions were able to fill the number of spots that they had outlined. But we heard from administrators time and again that recruitment was a challenge. I already mentioned that half of the programs focused on recruiting underrepresented students. In addition, a number of programs focused on underprepared students. So making sure the students who are the furthest behind academically have additional support so that they can start college on day one, feeling prepared and feeling confident. Institutions employed a ton of different outreach strategies. They emailed, they used social media, they sent mailers home to students, they sent individualized postcard home to students. They partnered with local high school counselors, with youth serving organizations, and with other departments within their institution to get in touch with students. We heard from one student that she saw it on her class of 2026 Instagram page and was like, oh, that's interesting. And then when she came to orientation, there was a person who worked for Summer Bridge. She was there and told her more about it. And she said, if it hadn't been for that in-person touch point, I don't know that I would have signed up, which just reiterates the importance of getting in front of students early and often. And then finally, programs offered incentives to increase enrollment and persistence in the institution. So about half of grantees implemented some sort of incentive. This included stipends. This included scholarships for the fall semester. So if you complete Summer Bridge, we'll give you a scholarship when you come here in the fall. Gift cards for students, technology. So a lot of institutions gave students laptops or iPads for participating, recognizing that there's tech disparity in the state and not everyone has access to technology. And some did less tangible, but still really effective incentives, like giving students who participated priority registration so they could complete their registration before all the other incoming freshmen and have access to more classes. Just because there's a lot of great work going on, wanted to highlight a couple of recruitment exemplars. So the first was Elizabethtown Community and Technical College. They actually hired a part-time employee to focus specifically on recruiting students to Summer Bridge. They also hired high school teachers to serve as tutors in the program. So that way, when students came to the program, they often had a tutor who was someone they had a pre-existing relationship with from high school. Western Kentucky was another one. So it was a little unique in that attendance in their program was mandatory for students who had below a 2.5 GPA. But they were able to really effectively market the program. So it cost $500 for a 5-week program that was residential. And they got to market it as a way for students to try out college for a low cost before they had to commit. And we heard that that was a message that really resonated with students and with parents. And now what actually went on during these programs. So about a quarter of the programs offered support to reduce the students' time in developmental education or co-requisite support courses. So they really focused on developing those core college level academic skills. So this included students taking placement tests and then receiving intensive tutoring, working on an individualized study plan. Some even offered expedited developmental courses over the summer so students could start in their entry-level college courses on day one in the fall. About 70% of students or of institutions also gave students the opportunity to earn credit over the summer. So this ranged from like a 1-year first-year experience course to 6 credits in general education courses. As I said, mentorship was a really big component. So almost all programs offered a mentoring component. This looked like peer mentoring. This also looked like embedded tutors and classes. So when students were taking classes over the summer, they had students who were a couple years older who were in the classes to help tutor them and help them help answer any questions that students had. Advising was also a core component. So about half of programs mentioned a specific advising activity or required advising meeting as part of the program. But I would say almost all had workshops that touched on advising topics like accessing services, how to register for classes. And then continued support was really big. So the vast majority of programs offered support beyond just the summer. So students who participated in the summer continued to receive mentoring, they had tutoring in the fall, they had specialized advisors who were keeping track of them and monitoring their success. And then last but certainly not least was community building. As I mentioned, we heard that over and over again that community building was the most impactful component of the summer bridge programs. Also can be a little hard to measure at times, but students building relationships, not just with their peers, but with faculty and with staff members was really important. And I wanted to just highlight 2 institutions. There are so many that are doing great things, but here are just a couple that I wanted to highlight. So one, when it came to college level academic preparation. So Bluegrass Community and Technical College had a program that was specifically focused on students who were underprepared. So they had academies that were structured around math, English, and English language development. So one of their target populations was students who are ELL. And during that, students took their placement test, and then they worked on an individualized study plan and had intensive tutoring over the summer, and at the end retook the test in order to place into a higher level of math or English and reading. This is a quote from one of their students who said, "Summer Academy saved me academically, it saved me financially, it saved me from my own negative thoughts about college. I get to graduate on time because of Success Academy, and I feel more financially safe because of the scholarship they gave me. The coping skills, counseling services, and talks on mental health helped me so much from mentally spiraling during the fall semester. The teachers and peer mentors have helped me feel less alone. They are so supportive." And then one more to highlight, Bellarmine College offered 3 programs for different target populations. So they had students of color, they had one for first gen and low income students, and then one for students with accommodations. So as part of the program, students took a 1-credit course. They learned more about their purpose, career pathways, their identity, how to navigate campus, and how to connect with alumni and faculty. So they did alumni panels for students and alumni networking events. And then in the fall, students continue to attend workshops and weekly study hall sessions. If they continue to attend study hall, they also continue to get that priority registration. And so what happened is students in the fall start going to their weekly study hall and they're telling their other friends about it. And so they actually saw the program grow in the fall as more students started attending study hall and the workshops because they heard from their peers how great the support was. So this is one quote from a program administrator. "Students that are in the Knights of Color program," so that's their program focused on students of color, "have a much higher GPA overall. They feel more connected overall, more of a sense of loyalty, and see the value of education. It's almost become a recruiting piece at this point. Students are saying, I came because of Knights of Color." It really helps with the retention piece. They're connected and they have good grades. And then finally, outcomes. So we heard from most institutions that students who participated in Summer Bridge program had higher outcomes than academically similar peers. We saw them look at a lot of different metrics across institutions, but one of the most common was fall to spring retention, and that ranged from 55% to 100%. So at Bellarmine University, they were the one that had 2 of their programs, Access BU and Navigate, that had 100% fall to spring retention that was reported on. Institutions also employed surveys to their students and found that students indicated higher levels of belonging and campus knowledge. And then a number of institutions are partnering with their institutional research centers in order to better conduct those evaluations of their programs. So a lot of rich information that institutions themselves have. And then just a few common challenges that we heard. One was around staff capacity. Everyone we talked to was so passionate about Summer Bridge and they worked so hard. They're there all day, every day during the Summer Bridge program. But for a lot of them, it's a lot of work, and many expressed that it would be helpful to have additional staff who is dedicated to supporting Summer Bridge programming. The next was around funding. So folks weren't always sure where funding was going to come from. They weren't sure about funding until later in the semester, which made recruitment hard. So just some uncertainty around how the programs will be able to continue, or at least be able to continue free of cost for students without additional funding. Student transportation, especially at campuses that don't have the ability to provide a residential program. So community and technical colleges in particular, students sometimes found it difficult to get to campus. And then COVID-19. So we did hear that the pandemic, both years, had impacted student recruitment and engagement for a number of reasons. So some of this is students were saying, I haven't had a normal summer in a few years. I want to spend time with my friends, or I am stressed financially and I can't give up going to work for a number of weeks to come to campus early. And some faculty also said that there were some learning disruptions and behavioral issues that they attributed to students not being in face-to-face instruction for all of high school. So then they're coming to campus. That's already a new learning environment to adjust to, but is also just different from how they did, the majority of their high school for some of them. I won't read through all of these, but just a few considerations we came to for institutions. One was really figuring out who that target population is. Who are the students at your institution that would benefit the most from additional support transitioning into their first year? Including student voice in the program design. So Robin and Phyllis hosted this convening for institutions in December, and we asked students to design their ideal Summer Bridge program, and it was super enlightening to hear what they had to say. Also, recruitment's really important. You have to recruit early and often. I keep thinking about that student who said, if I hadn't had that second touch point, I probably wouldn't have enrolled. Keeping costs low is key to help reduce the financial burden for students and their families and keep programs open and accessible. And then finally, making sure that they continue to leverage peer mentorship. We heard how important that is for supporting students and helping them to build relationships and feel more comfortable on campus. So that was a quick overview of a lot of really rich information that we had the ability to look through. But we have about 8 minutes or so. I see there's lots of things in the chat, so I'll check that. But I also just wanted to pose to the group a few questions. One is what is one thing that you learned about Summer Bridge programs from this presentation today that you maybe didn't know? And the next is, what is one thing that you can do to help increase awareness of Summer Bridge programs? We heard from one student, she said, the ideal Summer Bridge program is one everybody knows about. So a lot of students said they were the only person from their friend group in high school who did Summer Bridge. A lot of people just were not aware that Summer Bridge programs were an opportunity. So what's one way that we can help get the word out about Summer Bridge programs and these opportunities? And then third, how can your agency or organization support Summer Bridge programs? Whether that's promoting communication for recruitment purposes, supporting programming, providing funding. So just a few questions for us. And then real quick, I'll just show you, this is kind of small, so I'm not sure how well you can read it, but here are the many institutions that received funding as a result of the Summer Bridge program. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share just so I can see everyone and see the chat. But wanted to pose those questions, and Janice, thank you for putting those in the chat. We'll start with anything you learned, any new information from this today.
Well, I'll speak up while everybody's getting themselves ready. I started a Summer Bridge program in Kentucky in 1998, one of the first, right? And I had conducted one when I was a professor at the University of Missouri. What we know about bridge programming is that it's by far the lowest cost way of making up learning loss and closing gaps. So we have to talk about the sustainability of this. How we do that is extremely important. I also believe it can be a route for us to increase the college going. You gave us a lot of information that indicated exactly that from the students. So this isn't, even though people had a variety, I want to let everybody know this, even though people had autonomy to do what they needed to do, they had to do it within a set of criteria that were standards that we set. So it wasn't, wild, wild west, but it was a way to look at the autonomy of that particular campus serving their particular populations, while at the same time digging into those outcomes that we have. And as someone who's studied this for a lot of years, and have done them for a lot of years, I think this is one of the most important items that we've done for the largest impact. Think about every one of those students that went on that would not have gone to college. We don't know how many that is, but we know it's many. We think about those students that actually got a head start financially, and they now know how to pay for college. That's another thing wasn't mentioned that they didn't know before. Third, they got a head start understanding that they can do college, and they're going to be retained higher to graduation. That's going to go to that state's economy that we're talking about. So I would, somewhere along the way, I think we're going to have some real serious conversations. We already are, but we think about high impact on all the things that we're talking about with CEC. I don't know how we can get more high impact than this. So I appreciate the report. It's really hard. They did a hybrid evaluation, qualitative and quantitative, which is great, by the way, but we'll know even more quantitatively here as we go through the next couple of years as people transition through college. And what we found out a long time ago is that they stayed in college to graduation almost completely. So that first year retention rate that we normally knock out a significant amount of students in, this doesn't happen with this population. So thank you for that report.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And I appreciate you bringing up that CPU did have some guide rails for these grants. It wasn't just design a program based in best practices, but what we also heard from institutions is the flexibility that they had to adapt to the needs of their students and how sometimes those needs even change throughout the course of the summer was really appreciated. A program that is at a KCTCS institution that serves a lot of non-traditional students who are working, who are commuting, it's just going to have to look different than a program that's at a four-year institution that's able to offer a residential program. So it was really cool to see how institutions adapted to fit the needs of their students. I saw one idea in the chat of how to increase awareness about summer bridge programs with Kentucky school superintendents. Any other ideas, folks? Feel free to unmute, or if you want to drop it in the chat. Wonderful. Sharing program information across local workforce development boards and others, that would be great. I would also say for local workforce development boards, institutions want more external partnerships. They want more people to come in and talk to their students about career opportunities, to network with their students. So connecting would be amazing. Wonderful sharing of Kate as well. Any other ideas?
So did you all see any programs that you thought we might be able to scale and offer almost like a model of a program that was offered across the state?
That's a good question.
Particularly in the area of learning loss, and I particularly always think about mathematics.
Yeah, well, I was
really
gonna
effective.
say, U of L has a great mathematics program, which I'm sure you are aware of. So their Math Accelerator program was one of the ones we looked at, and a great example of a program. So for folks who are unfamiliar with their program, what they did is they had students who were underprepared in math or could use additional support in math coming into U of L, took their first level math course, began working on that over the summer. And so it's an online platform, but they had tutors in the room. So whenever a student got stuck, they were able to call a tutor over who was able to work them through. So I think that program is honestly one of the best examples, Jenny, particularly for math and for underprepared students. As far as like a program that could be implemented statewide. I think one thing we heard is we've tried online, and online works for some students, but it's really hard because it's hard to do the community building. So I think an in-person program, or offering components at least that are in person, is great. And that also makes it hard to make it uniform across campuses. Just recognizing that there are differences in institutions and in their student populations. But I think focusing.
So the one thing that I think would have been beneficial, particularly where I think in math, I think there's a lot of students who just can't learn math virtually.
Right.
And then a student who lives in Lexington, who's going to EKU, could still do a math person in program in the summer, because the residential piece is what really increases the cost. And it's what really makes it difficult for students to be able to do that and still work and do those types of things. So I just wondered if you all had any conversations about scaling any of the, particularly the learning loss programs up across the Commonwealth.
I do, Jenny, think your question is really good. And actually Representative Tipton asked what it would look like to scale it. And I would say we allotted up to $200,000 last year, and only 2 institutions even asked for that much because of the sustainability piece. It was run, it would vary as little as 27,000 to maybe 50,000. It wasn't a humongous amount. And to your point, Jenny, a lot of that was coming 3 days of a week, and maybe doing 2 days online, or a 5-day, depending on what that may be. The residential is way more comprehensive, clearly, and expensive with food and residential pieces of that. But to really get folks on campus and acclimate, a lot of folks did the day-to-day, because of jobs and childcare. And, and a lot of I'm so glad that Mr. Gregory had put on there about adult education, because not all of our students were high school seniors coming in as freshmen. We had single parents. We had adults coming in as a first time enrolled at KCPCS or one of our 4-year institutions. They couldn't spend the night. They had families, but they could come. I know even Jenny with U of L's thing around future educators, they had a very diverse group of students from all walks of life, and they, were able to use the TARC system, and they were able to get there, and it was manageable. So it was really varied. But I think what was probably and I don't want to speak out without reading their final reports, but just from anecdotal, from what we heard at the community of practice, it was very manageable and still successful, even if you didn't do the residential piece. And I think that would be, that's where we got the majority of our requests, because a lot of them came from KCPCS. And a lot of them were because they'd never done summer bridge. They'd done orientation, but not a summer bridge. And it was really successful. And when we heard from students, they just were glad to be on campus and got to experience it before everybody else came. And, when we did the community of practice student panel in December, it was powerful. It was, I got to actually walk through campus and not get lost. And when everybody else got here, I knew where to go. Or I would have never used the writing center or any math tutor. But because my summer bridge experience included that, then I knew it wasn't a bad thing, and it was free. I mean, some people think that it costs extra money to do those things. And so just the experiences and the intentionality of acclimating new students, regardless of their walk of life, age, or anything else, was really quite powerful of that transition, in really alleviating a lot of those anxieties. And so they look different, but there's some common pieces in there. And a lot of that's the reality check of life and flexibility. Dr.
Amanda, I wanted to try to address a little bit of the capacity.
Yeah.
I can tell you in 1998 to 2000, to sustain this 98, 2000 EKU, to sustain 75 students in a summer bridge program where they got 6 credit hours and made up developmental at those times 0 credit hour courses, but we gave them 6 credit hours toward graduation. At that time, it was a little over 40,000 to sustain it. That was then. I mean, so that gives you an example of what it could be with tuition and everything now, and everything else. not sure that helps you, Representative Tipton, but we ran the data on that back in those days. Now, a lot of it was using student help in peer tutoring and peer advising, but we had study tables every night as an example too. And we put them up in the residence halls and brought them. This was a pure face-to-face group. So there were a lot of it now, so that was then.
Beth?
Amanda, if I could jump in, I mean, I think best practice would absolutely to be having it on campus, but I would also love to see the opportunity for students maybe that are working a job during the summer. And so they are committed and they're tied up, or so many students don't live in the town where the college university is located. And so they may not be able, it might be a little bit more difficult, or they're just not going to come and participate on campus because they're going to have to, leave home. So I would love to see that hybrid option where at least there was a virtual opportunity for those students.
Yes, and we did allow the hybrid. The first year we were really looking at just getting folks on campus because some of those students were incoming sophomores and had never been on campus because of COVID restrictions, and they had no friends and no sense of them being a part of that campus. But we did allow the hybrid approach that they didn't have to come every single day, especially if it was non-residential, but to be on campus at some point. But absolutely, you're right. I mean, some were worried about transportation, paying for a bus ticket or for the gas money because they were at a pretty good distance. So I think we've learned a lot of how to refine that. And I do think there are some definite pieces of the model, as Dr. Thompson has mentioned, and Brianna, in just their review of things we could narrow down and have a range. But the peer mentors, the thing that is the new problem is a good problem is that last year's mentors want to be mentors this year. And last year's participants want to be mentors because they want to have the same impact on incoming students and to give them that same experience as they experience with their peer mentors. So, to hear the campuses talk like, gosh, we don't know how to tell people no because so many people want to be engaged in that. That's a really good problem to have. And so, yes, Beth, we absolutely hear that and heard that from the students as well.
Have you all considered collecting that as a data point on the files that come from the colleges about whether or not a student participated in any type of summer bridge activity, so that you could do some statewide type of research as from a longevity standpoint?
I love that idea.
I do too.
Great idea. Jenny, not that you're ever short of great ideas, but that's a good example. So we can run some direct correlations then throughout the next years they're in college to see. We've done that with dual credit.
Right.
As an example, same process. That's how we're getting the data back to show how effective dual credit is for college sustainability. I mean, for these students, especially students of color. Like that idea.
Well, we had more summer bridge activities than we've ever had before. And I think I roughly thought that maybe 600 to 700 of our entering freshmen participated. Some of them were not all CPE funded. Some of them were ones that were unit funded but I've got to think, and I kept saying I was going to collect all that data because, this person has who was participating in this program and this person has who have, but we didn't collect it centrally. And I just think if the CPE could start to think about collecting that centrally, I'm convinced after just watching our different data that sure, there are programs that are best practices and they're ideal, but there's a difference even if you just participate in a 1 week virtual. It makes some type of impact that is positive in their retention and their success.
Jenny, was most of your interactions, were those face-to-face or was it kind of split between?
It was a real mix. It was a real mix. I mean, we had our STEM, the one that CPE funded, that was just amazing. That was 12 low income URM, and they lived on campus for 8 weeks doing research. And when they came to me to promote it, I'm like, okay, I hate to tell these people, they are not going to find one low income student who can give up 8 weeks. And 12 students did it. And we saw those students' poster presentations at the end. And that experience was life-changing. It was only 12 students, but it was life-changing. So it went from that to like 1 week virtual things, Paul. So there was and then we did like a 3-day, well, this wasn't CPE funded, but we did a 3-day camp at the beginning of school. That was also a great summer bridge belonging community building thing. So it was all over the board.
It's really hard to build community in a virtual environment where they don't know anybody. And it's just like new students coming in that don't have experience with online learning, and they struggle too. So,
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you, Jenny. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Congratulations on ECTC.
Thank you. Yeah, we were ecstatic.
Can I ask? Well, not ask. I want to address the equity and recruiting piece. This is pretty broad in terms of equity, and I love what I'm seeing, but there's a group that I never hear discussed, and we have to address restorative practices. We have to discuss the students who are part of DJJ and who are in alternative schools in whatever county. See, Fayette County has MLK, right? So BCTC has this amazingly wonderful program. Do they ever go to MLK and recruit, quote unquote, those kids? Because those kids are in the district, those kids matter. You got some brilliant babies in these programs who, for whatever reason, have had all of these things happen to them. So I want to know if we're ever recruiting with those kids.
Penny, that's a great question. And I think that's something that we could be very intentional about, just even with all of our 8-5 schools, because then we'll know exactly where they are and it's not haphazard. And I think this is where we really need help elevating the recruitment piece, because the campuses are saying we're having a hard time recruiting because it's hard to find students. But if we have combined K-12 and all the supporting groups and even our workforce, and even with John and adult education, there's some different avenues to be intentional to increase that access. I love that idea. Dr. Thompson, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. To answer Penny's question is yes and no. Some do very much target MLK and those. But the thing about it is, I'm going to interpret your statement a little bit different, Penny, if you don't mind. I'm hearing you say that this, once again, is low-hanging fruit, and these are the kids that in fact probably need to know that they can be successful, because many have been told they can't. So
That's
it should
exactly
become
right.
one of our primary ones. Yeah,
Yep.
Dr. Gregory, I would argue the same thing about what we need to do in adult ed and how we need to really look once again at this GED plus in great detail as we do some of the bridge programming around that even. So I would argue, Penny, you're absolutely right. And this needs to be a conversation that we have with our districts, that they help. This would be a great way for the resources some of them use for us to be in partnership monetarily even with getting these kids where we need to go. So I know I've taken what you said, Penny, to the next step, but your point is well taken. The answer is yes, some of our programs do, but not in my mind as an intentional best practice. And that's what I like hearing.
Great. Anyone else? I really appreciate this conversation in the chat and face-to-face. It has given us so much. And this is really kind of a good caveat. Unless, Brianna, if you have anything else to wrap up, I just totally jumped in. My apologies.
No, you're good. Take it away.
This is exactly the kind of conversation we want to have as we move into the next two topics, which we'll do a breakout so we can cut it at once, which is really about that 8th and 9th grade on track, and then first year success that we talked about, of exactly what Penny's saying, really, and what everybody else has said is, I can share it with this group. I can get the word out to here. This is exactly why we want you together, because we alone, individuals, cannot do this. And we're not even thinking of all the folks that it could impact. And so what we've done is we've just divided you up just based on just the who's here and really different perspectives. With 9th grade on track, the area that you all identified as the priority is catalyzed bridge experiences for students transitioning from 8th to 9th grade. So we'll dig into that on the 9th grade on track. And then first year success, about strengthening relationships among students, staffs, and faculty to foster a sense of belonging, community, and support. And there are actions that are a little more actionable on those things. So at this time, Robin is going to send you to the breakout room, and We will begin there, getting some feedback and come back together at the same time, I believe. Is that right, Robin?
Yeah, I think we can manage about 15 minutes in the breakout. Does that sound right?
Perfect.
Okay.
I don't like.
I guess the answer is yes.
Dr. Thompson, I did not get a chance to say who in our group was going to present back, so it might be you drawing the short straw there.
It's going to be me. I'm going to leave it up to Dr. Gregory. What he doesn't finish up, I'm going to finish, put in the holes. You shouldn't have opened your mouth first, sir.
Thank you, sir. So certainly, so some of the things that we spoke about was from a uniform process is to coming up with a tool to identify based on the course loads of students, those things that translate directly to success in that first year. So that was also one of the main nuggets. A second nugget was that the recognition that the Office of Adult in Kentucky, one of the primary functions and so one of the primary raters of success is not completion of the GED, but is actually transition to college. So that is so one of the most important things that are significant. So those are two of the big nuggets, and so those are two of the big rocks that I took from our small group session, and I will yield the rest of the floor to some others that may want to add to that.
Anyone else want to add before I finish out the summary, rest of the summary?
I don't know. Are you going to talk about placement testing? What?
Well, you just did. Go ahead, Jenny.
So Amanda's going to smile because she knows this is like me with a dog with a bone, right? I do believe we need to convene a conversation about placement in first year classes and how test optional has changed that and what we need to be doing to better place our students in their first semester classes. To set them up.
Just would add the wraparound services with that, right? I mean, the idea that is crucially important. The other item, just for the sake of time, I'll add in addition, we all agreed that there's certain elements of the first year that should be standardized. Everybody should have a FYE course that's not orientation to the college or but one that incorporates all the things that we believe that are important. The importance of general education, the importance of diversity and inclusion, the importance of time management, of financial literacy, how they look at major and career and all those, that should be standardized because we have enough data to show the output's huge on the first year, one of the biggest outputs, but yet we don't do it. We also believe, Amanda, that bridge programming for learning loss really helps success in the first year. We also, as Dr. Gregory said, that we have enough data to show the correlations between the courses they take in high school and their GPA and overall success. How do we align our dual credit in such a manner that they can be standardized and everybody offers at least those with the learning outcomes that we need to ensure that everybody will have that understanding as they come into college and look at the success of those. We also believe that you should get peers more involved, whether it's peer mentoring and advising, and it goes heavily to the success of the students, tons of data on that. And anything else I'm missing? Diana?
Credit standardization.
Do what?
The dual credit standardization.
Dual credit standardization. Also, we talked about our workforce cabinet really taking our career centers, basic adult education, post-secondary education facilities like community colleges, and KIA, and all of us really in creating a resource guide that all of us can use to help students know about all the wraparound services, all the things they need done. So the idea of creating this as partnership, I think, is crucial to this information out for that first year success. We could have talked about a lot more, Amanda, but you didn't give us enough time. So I appreciate it.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, we ran out of time too, and that we were in the middle of it. And Eddie had just sent me a message on his thoughts, and Jim, and Zoom forces us out, won't even let us finish our sentence. So we will actually hop in if that's okay, Robin. So we got on such a good conversation, really talking about 8th and 9th grade transition. And Representative Tipton started us off really thinking about how kids absolutely have to be academically and socially prepared. And that's a tall order if we don't take that and we are not systematic and intentional about that transition. Because both of them are shocks to the system in academics and their social, really their social capital, where they belong, which kicked off a really good conversation from perspectives of parents and the partnerships around this. Penny shared some really strong, they have very strong transition bridge type approaches from elementary to middle, and her children, what they experienced from middle to high. And so, which is powerful and not common. I wish it was more common, and we were just getting into that. Lieutenant Governor shared also just around the professional learning around for teachers. So if we were to do things, and Jim Flynn shared as well, if we are to do these activities throughout the year to really prepare students and transition them, what are we asking people to do? And Beth had brought up, 9th grade centers, but then that just gives you another transition if you don't have a very strategic approach. And so what I heard really quickly, and then Eddie even shared just different ways to students transition, band programs, sports programs, teams, like ways that they feel included. So we talk about belonging in a post-secondary setting. It's the same approach in I think a scary thing when you're entering the high school. We probably all remember when we went to high school and what we worried about most, and how we were to fit in and find friends or find our friends and make it work. And so we really, what I heard from our group, and I definitely want them to jump in, is really about the role groups. What is the role of the teacher in this transition piece? What are the roles of the parents? How do we onboard parents throughout, not leaving them out? The students, and I heard you all talk about peers. We talked about peers. What is their role? The schools talking together. That sounds so little, but it's a huge deal, even if it's a small district, and the community. Amy brought that forward, just about the importance of the community being involved. And so it really helped push my thinking about some next steps to really, first of all, if you know about 8th or 9th grade transitional pieces, I think, Robin, that you'd put in the chat, share them with us. We just saw Boone County or Kenton County this week have high school seniors talking to 8th graders about transition. You can't get any stronger. If I was an incoming freshman, I would definitely want to hear from a senior in high school. That's way cooler than an adult, but to hear the real story around that. We see the same thing with college students mentoring and being near peer mentors for incoming freshmen into college. So I want to stop talking, let our group share anything that was not elevated, but we had just gotten started on a good conversation, Robin. Is there anything else from my group? Okay. So
It's not necessarily, I'm sorry, Amanda.
yeah, no,
You know me.
please, Penny, go, please.
It's not necessarily about what we discussed, but it is about what we discussed. I keep hearing kids should be academically prepared. From an equity standpoint, what does that look like? We are not saying that all kids have to be 3.5 or 4.0 students, right? Because those are the students that we key on. We key on the gifted and talented. We key on the ones who are taking the advanced classes on the advanced algebra track from middle school and going into high school. Academically prepared does not mean straight A's. And parents need to hear that, because that's where the pressure and the social issues and the depression and the anxiety come into play, starting, dare I say, in 7th and 8th grade, right? So what does academically prepared mean? Are we just all talking about the standards? Just a question.
Great question. And I think you're right. And what I have heard, and I'll say anecdotally, I've not read about it, but there has been greater angst around, really around not having the A, because when the students were online and they were participating and we were trying to keep them engaged, then they got a lot of participation points. And now that they are having grades based on if they're demonstrating understanding and mastery of the content and they're not getting A's, students are really stressed out about that because they have this unrealistic expectation to be a straight A student. And that does not mean that they are not academically being prepared for what they're doing and that they are not equipped. So I think, Penny, that's a really key question and clear definition that we need to make sure that it's not perfection. It's not perfect. but it is preparedness so they can thrive and grow, and have the support they need to do so. I appreciate that. Yes. Anything else on this?
I'll just say, I do think, and this is, from my own personal experience with, I've got a 14-year-old. I think the real-time nature of the grading and everything that happens now in K through 12 really adds stress to students because mistakes happen. And these students know that, if they've got whomever is watching over their progress in this, there are unrealistic expectations that, especially I look now at the students that were sophomores during COVID have come to us, and they are really, really struggling and really need a level of support we knew was coming, but is difficult to provide.
Absolutely. Jenny, were you going to say something or not? I'm sorry. I thought you.
I'm trying to be smart enough to add a link into an article that was in Ed Week a couple weeks ago called "College Readiness Shouldn't Be a Top Priority for K through 12." And I was trying to figure out how to share that in the chat.
Oh, well, at least send the reference on it. We'll try to find it and put it in the resources for folks to read.
Okay, I'll do that.
You said it shouldn't be?
That's the article. It was in Ed Week about 2 weeks. I'll send it to Amanda and she can post it.
Okay.
Anything else you all want to share before we kind of move into the next part of our day? Meeting, we're coming close soon.
So the only other thing that I was going to say about our first year thing was, we heard so much about incentives. I think when Brianna was talking about some of the common themes among the bridge programs was that they added incentives. And I know that there's some states that are taking their equivalents of keys programs and moving them on into incentives, for in college. So completion of so many hours will add to your base keys amount. Grades will add to your base keys amount. And I didn't know, Aaron, if you all have ever looked at some of those programs as whether or not, what are some things that we can really do to get kids to earn, and earn 30 hours in their freshman year.
What we have to a degree, but then I'm going to pose something else. Representative Tipton, I don't see him on here anymore, but oh yeah, there he is at the top. I'm sorry. We've had a lot of discussion about what does it look like to have our financial aid tied to some of these incentives as a whole across the board. Now, we have seen, though, in other states when there's incentives tied to 15, 30, 45, 60 hours, the opportunity for them to stay in school longer. Some of our unmet need is really there because of the increased pressure on finances by the time they get to their junior year. So we know it releases that too. So we have a lot of data on that. But I think as a whole, whether it's keys or anything else, I think we'll probably somewhere along the way, all of us, Kia, us, others, need to really look holistically at, are we getting the best bang for our dollar in the outcomes that we want for the state, right? And I think that is, and once again, Representative Tipton, hope you don't mind me using your name loosely. You have asked us that question and wanting to look at it for a while. And I'll let you jump in and say anything you want to say along those lines. The other thing I will throw in first, though, I think, Penny, it's important that we understand that academic preparedness anymore is seldom purely on your academic scores, because to continue to be successful in college, as we found out, a standardized test score doesn't create that either. As we look at preparedness, we have to take into account social, emotional, cultural, and a variety of other elements that, in fact, when students drop out of college for academic reasons, it's only about 20%, but even that 20% was caused by other issues other than just not being academically prepared. So I think it is important that we look at all of this in a very holistic way. So sorry, I hope I answered a little bit of your question, Jenny.
Thank you.
Representative Tipton here, and just follow up on President Thompson's comments. We've had the KEYS program for many years. It's our merit-based scholarship, but it is not our only lottery-funded scholarship and grant. We have CAP, we have PTG. Over the years, we've added dual credit. We have Kentucky Workforce Ready Scholarship. There are some others, and some people don't even know we have a teacher scholarship program. But we're going to try and highlight that a little more during session. One thing that I've asked that we're going to have a bill coming this time to develop a task force to look at all of our lottery-based scholarship and grant programs. And the real question is, where are our dollars being affected? Where are students benefiting? How can we get the best return on the investment of these dollars for students across the states? And we're going to have to take a holistic look at all of these programs as we move forward. There will be a lot of KEYS bills filed this time. I've already been briefed on a lot of them. It's coming. Everybody likes to tweak KEYS, but we're going to take a look at those. But I think holistically, we need to look at all of our scholarship and grant programs and how can we be intentional about how we invest those dollars.
I agree. Thank you.
Hey, Robin, you want to take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, thanks to everyone for a wonderful conversation today. The passion for student success in this group is always inspiring to me. I just want to talk a little bit about next steps. I'm going to share my screen here so that you can take a look at some of the things that are coming up. First of all, Amanda and I will be using the suggested actions that have come from our conversation today to convene some groups of folks who know a lot about what we've been talking about to see where we might go from here. And we'll also begin to compile that annual CEC report that sort of details all of the accomplishments and the priorities and the recommendations from the previous year. In addition to that, we'd like to challenge each of you to just think about all the things we've talked about today and commit to a small act every day or every week or every month that connects to and influences the values and the goals of our CEC. We've talked a lot about today that a P20 council looks at a lot of things and they have varying levels of importance to each one of us based on where we're from and who we represent. And so we just really challenge you to think about communicating the goals and values of the CEC with the circle that you travel in, and so that we can have the most influence possible. Please go ahead and write down the next meeting of the CEC. It will be in March on the 22nd at the same time that we typically meet. You'll be receiving a calendar invitation if you haven't already received that, but we want to make sure that you are ready for that and aware of it. Please go ahead and mark your calendar. Want to just end with a couple of announcements as we wrap up today's meeting. I have in the chat box, there is a link to a folder that has information about all of these things. So you don't have to write it all down as I tell you a little bit about it. But I'm excited to share today that we're going to be sponsoring a dual credit in Kentucky webinar series here at CPE. Our very own Representative Tipton will be on the very first one, which will be aired on February 16th. And he will be joined by Alex Perry from the College and High School Alliance. And I know that you all probably remember seeing Alex at some of our meetings for the CEC. And some of the other members of the CEC, Jenny, Beth, will be on other sessions of that series. So we look forward to that. It will go from February all the way up through May, and we'll talk about some of the important topics that we've discussed and ones that have been elevated by our stakeholders across Kentucky. I do want you to be aware that our Student Success Collaborative will be holding their annual Student Success Summit on February 27th and 28th, and there's a link in that folder I sent you where if you want to register for that or learn more about it, you certainly can. We've talked a lot about Summer Bridge today. I just want you to know that our 2023 Summer Bridge grant proposals will be coming soon. The request for proposals will be coming very soon, so be watching for that. We're excited about the conversation today. I think we're all in agreement that Summer Bridge is a wonderful thing, and just trying to think about how we can expand and sustain those programs. The The report that Amanda and Dr. Thompson spoke about today, the renewed promise of P20 councils from the Education Strategy Group, is also in that folder. There's a PDF of it there that if you want to read the whole report, feel free to do that. We've also included a FAFSA toolkit that we received today from Kia. We're grateful for that. A lot of opportunities for you to share information on your social media channels about FAFSA February or February FAFSA. So we want to really encourage students to complete the FAFSA and get on the road to college. And then finally, inside that folder, there's a subfolder that has some social media posts. You can feel free to grab any of those and use them if you want to. They have some interesting quotes or ideas about developing a sense of belonging among post-secondary students, and also about the importance of summer bridge for the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. So feel free to grab those and tag them with your own organizations, or use them however you'd like. So I think that is it in terms of announcements. You've got the link to that folder there in your chat box. As always, if you all have any questions or great ideas between now and March when we see you again, please feel free to contact Amanda or me or both of us to let us know. And especially if you know of any great programs for 8th and 9th grade transitions, if you happen to think about that, so that we can elevate it. We want to say a big thank you to Brianna and to Janice for being with us today and sharing the Summer Bridge report. And I think that is all I have. Any final words from our co-leads before we adjourn today?
Is Lieutenant Governor still with us?
I think she just logged off.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm the co-lead that will end this, right?
There you go.
I think it is important. Good to see you, Eddie. Good to see everybody on here. I think it is important for a couple of things in summation that we end with, and I won't do too much repeating, but I will say that ESG, thanks for the evaluation. I knew the Summer Bridge stuff would be good, but thank you for the in-depth evaluation. I think I want to end with this. What we've done the last 2 years has been very successful, and I hope you're able to celebrate it. So much so, we recognize it here in Kentucky, but other people around the nation recognize it. We get to talk about it fairly often, and I think it's because of engagement from everybody. We may not all disagree on everything. We do agree on what's good for this state, and that's the young people and Dr. Gary, the older people, getting a post-secondary credential that matters. This isn't about just P through workforce. It's now about empathy through workforce. I heard that, Amy. But I think it also is important that we should be talking about having every child ready for career, having every adult ready for career, but college of some sort, Paul, has to be a part of that equation as we prepare. High school graduation by itself isn't the important thing, nor is GED by itself, Dr. Gregory. I mean, it is about transitioning into the workforce with college being an intervening variable. I think the other thing too, we talked a lot about equity and quality. It is important that we don't leave anybody out, Penny. It's important that we are very intentional how we not do that, all right? But it also is important that we look at all the elements of success, not just academic, how well you score on a test or your GPA, but all the pieces that go in. And transitions matter, as our bridge programs shown you, not just 8th to 9th, but not just high school or college, but 8th to 9th and all of those. And every one of you are bringing to the table with a unique characteristic and representative understanding of populations you serve. And as you showed the last 2 years, as I hope we do for the rest of 23 and on, is that we put on the big hat. We all represent a smaller hat, no doubt, but this is about the bigger hat, Representative Tipton. It is about the idea that we all have skin in this game, and somehow if we create a mass understanding of what it means to be successful for all of our citizens, then in fact that skin will be okay. And the idea that we need to be truly in a place like this that we can discuss that. I appreciate you. Amanda, thank you and your crew, Robin, all of you for the work you do. There's no way we could do this without you. Once again, I keep telling people I am a pretty face, but Amanda does all the work. You know, and I appreciate you and the entire staff. And so thank you all.
Thank you. We will be in touch for sure. You guys have a great week.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bless them.